Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Just a few items to note before we begin. This will be recorded and available to share. We will also be uploading another video file to our YouTube channel afterwards that includes American Sign Language, but live captions are available now. In the description of the video, you'll see a link for additional resources and ways to connect. My name is Stephanie Drenka. I am the Communications Director for Dallas Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. This work is always deeply personal, but tonight it feels even more so because I am also a Korean American adoptee. Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation began as a multi-year national and community-based effort led by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. The TRHT approach examines how the belief system of a false hierarchy of human value became embedded in our society and works with communities to design and implement effective actions that will permanently uproot it. There are 14 TRHT communities around the country, many of whom are on the call tonight in solidarity. The state of Alaska, Battle Creek, Flint, Kalamazoo, and Lansing, Michigan, Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Louisiana, Buffalo, New York, Greater Chicago, Illinois, Dallas, Texas, Los Angeles, California, Richmond, Virginia, Selma, Alabama, and St. Paul, Minnesota. The idea for this event happened organically as members of different communities reached out to each other when news broke about the shooting in Atlanta. It was through these raw and painful conversations that we were reminded not only of the importance for solidarity, but also the collective power of our platforms. In sharing our stories and building relationships, we believe we can begin healing together. Throughout the event, we ask that you hold the names of our fallen sisters in your hearts, honoring their memory and uplifting their loved ones during this time of mourning. Tan Xiao Jaye, Feng Dao Yo, Park Soon-chung, Kim Hyung-jun, Kim Soon-cha, and Yu Yong-ae. Before we start the program, I'd like to invite our Dallas TRHT Executive Director, Jerry Hawkins, to give a land and people acknowledgement.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to all of my TRHT family and our extended family for being here. We really appreciate you and love you, and thank you for your immediate mobilization during this time. Right now, we want to give a land and people acknowledgement. A big part of the work that we do is trying to decolonize not only ourselves, but the space in which we live, which is on stolen land. In the space in which I live, Dallas, Texas, the land of the Caddo, the land of the Wichita, and the land of the Comanche, and so many other nations who have stewarded this land and took care of it thousands of years before Dallas was called a city. In our other spaces across the country, we implore our communities to learn about the First Nations people who live there, to support them because they are still here, still struggling against colonialization, and also to provide resources, to provide other support to our First Nations communities. We also implore you to learn about enslavement. We do a land and people acknowledgement, also recognize the people who have toiled this land for hundreds of years, not only enslaved, but also in what we call slavery is another name, and sharecropping, Jim Crow, my ancestors, folks who have built the infrastructure of this country that go unrecognized, and stories who are erased. So we really thank you all for being here. We want to build a foundation of supporting the folks who have lived here for thousands of years and uplifting the stories of folks who are enslaved on this land. Right now, I will pass it to my Chicago sister, Jaye, who will introduce our first speaker. Hi, Jaye.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight and being in this space with us. Again, my name is Jaye Hobart, and I have the pleasure and honor of introducing a dear friend and fellow Asian American, Miss Inhe Choi. Ms. Choi comes to us tonight with her organization that she leads in Chicago called the HANA Center, who is not only leading current active calls to action and responses to everything that is going on the ground right now in result of this tragedy, but also has been supporting and serving the Korean American and immigrant communities locally and nationally for a very long time. So Inhe, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, good afternoon. 안녕하세요. I see my Korean sisters here. So my name is Inhe Choi, and I want to first begin by saying that our hearts are with the families, friends, and communities impacted by the mass killings in Atlanta, Georgia, and now with Boulder, Colorado. We know that the news of this atrocity in Atlanta is particularly hurting our Asian American community that has been struggling to protect ourselves and our loved ones from the spread of COVID-19 like everybody else. But we also had the spread of the rampant anti-Asian violence. We've seen the news of older people being harassed and pushed on the side of the street. Just this Sunday, a woman was going to anti-Asian protest in New York and was assaulted. So about a year ago, Chinese for Affirmative Action in San Francisco has launched Stop Hate, API Hate database about a year ago. And about 4,000 or 3,800 cases were reported. And they were a mix of microaggressions, verbal assaults, and many physical attacks as well. Like here in Chicago too, we had everywhere from people being yelled at on our public transportation, at grocery stores being hit by carts, and to people getting rocks thrown or just like plain beat up because he was a Asian Amazon driver. And it's all about go back to China, you're a virus, get away from me, those type of things. So why is this happening? People were asking. So we know that, we think of like first, the last 4 years of Trump were filled with brazen hate and anti-immigrant policies. When the pandemic began, he called it Chinese virus and other offensive terms. This man and his administration emboldened white supremacists to fully express themselves through violence, as we saw on January 6th during the Capitol insurrection, among many other atrocities that they've been committing forever. But we need to also remember that anti-Asian hate has a long history in the US, actually from the beginnings of when Chinese Americans arrived to work on dangerous and low-paying jobs to build the railroads in the US. Laws did not allow Chinese witnesses to testify when a white man killed a Chinese man. There were massacres, lynching, human zoos of Pacific Islanders, and laws that barred Chinese and other Asians from immigrating. And then one of the later ones, in the World War II, US put Americans of Japanese descent in concentration camp when Japan attacked the US. So Trump did not appear suddenly in the last 4 years. I know many of you here already know this, but Trump has been here all along. So, it is also very critical to note that out of about 4,000 reported anti-Asian violence, about 70% were experienced by women. And women experienced violence at 2.5 times more than men. So why is that, you may ask? Well, we know that women were getting harassed way before pandemic. So as Asian American women, this targeted violence that resulted in killing of 6 Asian American women was especially hard because it accentuates the culture of sexualizing Asians. So there's also a long history of festicizing Asian women as disposable that has led white men to exploit, traffic, rape, and even murder Asian women without accountability in the US, and also in Asian countries where sex industry around US military bases have been proliferating. So for Asian American women, we're all really well aware that imperialism, militarism, and corporate greed dehumanize, displace, and target us. And there needs to be accountability with a clear understanding that it's racism, white supremacy, gender-based violence, and racialized misogyny that are the underlying causes of the violence committed. So this mass shooting is also a part of a larger story of marginalized communities terrorized by anti-Black racism and xenophobia, including, as you all know, ongoing police murders of Black, Latinx, and LGBTQ people and deportation of immigrants. So I just want to also share that, there are 11 million undocumented immigrants who are undocumented. They'll be afraid to come out and report on any of these. And out of 11 million undocumented immigrants, there are 1.7 Asian Americans who are forced to live in the shadows. And thousands of inter-country adoptees, over half of which are of Asian heritage, are also undocumented, being deported and are being deported. So we also said that, I know we're going to talk about solutions later, but the impact on undocumented immigrants in this moment is also critical to remember, and that we need a path Congress must to legislate on the 11 million undocumented immigrants and adoptees. So I just wanted to kind of provide this background context for the conversations to have had throughout the evening. Thank you.
Thank you to our elder Inhe for providing what is happening. She said I can call her Inhe, so thank you so much for being with us. Now I want to introduce our brother from Alaska, Dr. EJ Ramos David. We were introduced to EJ through our family at the First Alaskans Institute in Nome, and we're blessed by his presence. EJ is a leading psychologist and activist. He's written books called Brown Skin, White Minds, Filipino American Post-Colonial Psychology, and also Internalized Oppression, the Psychology of Marginalized Groups. These books focused on the colonial mentality and the psychological implications among Filipino Americans, and also the universality of internalized oppression. EJ is going to provide us a bit more of the historical context of the time in which we're dealing with. So EJ, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for inviting me here. Thank you all for organizing this and for inviting me. And yeah, I really appreciate you all. I really don't have much to add to what's Inhe shared. But what's happened over the past year with the rise of anti-Asian violence and what happened in Atlanta shouldn't be surprising to anyone, really, because we know that this country was founded on stolen indigenous lands, that it was built on the backs of enslaved Black peoples, and that it rose to become a world power largely because of the exploitation and colonization of peoples of color in other parts of the world. So this country was founded and built on the myth of white supremacy, on the notion that it was white people's manifest destiny to colonize lands and peoples, that it was the white man's burden to civilize and teach the rest of the world. So it shouldn't be surprising that our society today is thick with white supremacy. It shouldn't be surprising that the institutions and policies that we have today reflect white supremacist values. And it shouldn't be surprising that our society today is saturated with inferiorizing and dehumanizing messages about peoples of color. White supremacy is just America's core. And, and pertaining specifically to anti-Asian racism, again, we shouldn't be surprised by this either. Violence that stems from white supremacy isn't new to Asians and Asian Americans. In fact, it is precisely white supremacist violence that forced many of us to come to the United States as colonized peoples, as refugees of American wars, or as immigrants looking for a better life, because the US stole our resources and exploited and ravaged our homelands and made living there very difficult. Anti-Asian policies isn't new. In 1875, the United States banned Chinese women from immigrating to the United States because they were seen as prostitutes and disease carriers. There's also the Chinese Inclusion Act, which a lot of people know about. The colonialism of the Philippines in 1899, because Filipinos were seen as uncivilized savages needing to be educated and trained by the US. In the early 1900s, Filipino farm workers were assaulted, murdered, lynched, and their homes and their community centers were bombed by white terrorists. The internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, because everybody of Japanese descent, including children, were seen as spies and unloyal to the United States. The mass murders of Sikh people in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, in 2012. The Muslim ban just a few years ago. So this country has repeatedly done this, right? And this country has also repeatedly waged war, like many wars, on Asian people in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Korea. This country has killed millions of Asians and destroyed our homelands. So this country stereotyped Asian people and dehumanized Asian people. Specifically, with Asian women, this country objectified and hypersexualized Asian women, seeing them as, like just low-level service workers, as exotic, as docile, as submissive, as objects, and just bodies that white men are entitled to have control over. And once you see people stereotypically, as less complex, as less whole, as less human, then you're more likely to become violent toward them. And, that's how dangerous biases are, and how dangerous it is for, our leaders and other authority figures, or our society more generally, to reinforce these stereotypes and biases. Words, jokes, they're not harmless. They hurt people. They inflict violence on people. They're deadly. But again, dehumanizing peoples of color and inferiorizing them is what this country was founded on. And the systems and institutions in this country still reflect white supremacy and the inferiorization and dehumanization of peoples of color. So, so this country can say whatever it wants. It can scream that it's been, that it's the beacon of democracy, right? And that it can scream that it's all about freedom and equality, and that racism and other forms of oppression don't happen here. And racist murderers can claim all they want that it's not about race, but as James Baldwin said, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And when we look at America, and when we look at what America has done ever since its founding, it's hard to believe what America says, because all America has done for hundreds of years is kill us. So what's been happening over the past year is not surprising. What happened in Atlanta is not surprising. This is who America has always been. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. David. For those of you who are new to the TRHT framework, narrative change is what we start with, telling the truth about our histories so that we can learn from them and do better. And then we move into the racial healing portion and the telling of our stories and sharing and getting affirmation and building relations. So the next section, I'm going to ask my fellow Asian American speakers to share their testimonies of anti-Asian racism and their experiences. The first speaker is a fellow Korean adoptee from Chicago, Jaye Hobart. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight her.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hello again. My name is Jaye Hobart, and I am a Korean transnational adoptee. I am representing Korean Adoptees of Chicago, which is a nonprofit organization serving the adult Korean adoptee community in Chicago since 2008. I'm so grateful for this space and this platform created here tonight for Asian Americans to be seen and heard. And I just generally hope to include the Korean adoptee narrative in the conversation. Where are you really from? You look like my favorite anime character. Are your eyes even open? me love you long time, will you be my geisha princess, ni hao. All of these things have been said to me and more throughout my life. I've heard firsthand from many other Asian American women about similar experiences. And these comments and treatment towards Asian and Asian American women are just a few of the many symptoms of the historical context of Asians living in America. Part of this history is transnational adoption, specifically Korean orphans and children who were abandoned near the end of the Korean War and thereafter. From the moment we were abandoned because our birth mothers were rejected by Korean society and then sold by our country of origin, our identities were erased, with many of us then being raised in predominantly white environments. This is traumatizing, and I had no idea what it meant or how it would impact me until later in life. More importantly, I realized that no amount of love and support by my incredibly loving American family could protect me from racism or the sexualization of my body. And so from white savior complex to adult transnational adoptees being deported due to the failure of our adoptive parents and agencies completing our paperwork, we feel silence and we feel invisible. You know, I spoke with a group of Korean American adoptees last Friday to reflect on the Atlanta shootings. And I can tell you that we are hurting and we grieve deeply for the victims and their families. But we are also scared and confused. Some questions that came up were, am I Asian enough to grieve about this? I don't know how to speak up. Why are people yelling at me or making me feel unsafe and uncomfortable during the pandemic? Why have I felt othered my entire life? Is there something wrong with me? No, there is nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing wrong with my Korean American adoptee and API sisters and brothers. I am grieving and I'm scared because I see myself in the Atlanta victims, caught in a web of anti-Asian racism, misogyny, white imperialism, and all of the other isms which harm me and other disenfranchised groups. And so I ask you tonight, are you able to pull away from your place of comfort and privilege and from social media and the news to just check in on us, to ask if we're doing okay and ask what we need? Can you help me be seen and heard? I urge you not only to be outraged and grieve for the lives lost in the Atlanta shootings, but also see the Asians, the Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders around you as more than just a headline, to listen to them and believe their stories and experiences, to learn about and acknowledge our history in America, and to most importantly, stand up to anti-Asian hate. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jaye, and especially for uplifting adoptee voices, because I know personally how we can be silenced and erased from the narrative. So thank you. And I am going to invite my fellow Dallasite, Ms. Amy Tran Calhoun, to share her story.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Tran Calhoun. I have many identities and many different roles that I juggle. The most important one is that I am the Southeast Asian Vietnamese American daughter of refugees. My headline tonight is Healing is an Action. This message is for folks who are most impacted by the physical and psychological violence against people of Asian descent. As a Southeast Asian Vietnamese American who is immersed in race talk for my career, I'm 100% about taking action and changing mindsets, practices, and policies. That said, doing race work full-time has its special level of physical and psychological trauma on one's body and mind. I gotta take a breath, y'all. At this moment, I have chosen to create boundaries in order to preserve my well-being. That boundary that I'm choosing for myself right now is that I'm giving only my time, resources, and emotional labor to healing. That is healing for myself and for my community. This became abundantly clear this weekend when I had the opportunity to facilitate a 2-hour healing session for other Dallas women of Asian descent. And while I encouraged us to reflect on how anti-Asian racism makes us feel and identify how these feelings manifest in our bodies, like how my heart is racing right now, or how I can feel this gut reaction in my stomach right now. That while I encouraged us to do that, I noticed that many participants did not speak about how the feelings lived in their body. And at some certain point, the conversation moved toward action. I gently redirected us to back the conversation into back into feelings in our bodies. And it was only then that we reflected on how many of us internalize that we don't deserve the time to process and heal. That like many of our immigrant or refugee parents and families, as a survival response, we have a compulsion to jump to action to solve a problem rather than experience our feelings. Yet when we don't allow space for our feelings to live and to breathe, they often physically manifest in our bodies, just like it's manifesting in my shoulders right now. That emotional pain then transforms into physical ailments because we aren't creating space for ourselves to heal. I want to offer tonight that healing is an action. And in fact, healing is the most important action for those who are most impacted by trauma to experience and to be able to sustain a lifelong commitment to anti-racism. This is why I am so deeply aligned with the TRHT model, and I'm so proud to be part of the Dallas TRHT community. Now, I know there's urgency to use this moment to educate the masses about Asian history and the complexity of Asian experiences. And I do not believe that I always have to be the one to do it. I support those who are up for the challenge. The thinking is that if we're the ones to educate, we can reduce the harm to our communities. Yes, this is possible. And I personally believe that those who are creating harm should bear the burden of reducing the harm, not us. So this message is for folks who may be further away from the physical and psychological violence against people of Asian descent. You are the ones who can support our communities by doing the work to listen and learn about Asian and Asian American history. If you don't know, I find that Google is a great resource. I actually happen to Google words every single day because I'm never sure if I'm using them correctly. So that said, I want to make it clear that, like many of you, I was not taught my Asian American history or Asian history. In fact, in 10th grade in my world history class, my teacher decided to skip the entire unit on Asia because we didn't have time. And I happened to be incredibly lucky that I found a student-led organization in college at UC Berkeley called the Southeast Asian Student Coalition that helps me understand the Southeast Asian diaspora and understand my family's refugee experience. And that was transformational. And shout out to SASC for inspiring a whole generation of children of Southeast Asian refugees to be change makers. And like many Americans, I also didn't learn about Black history, but I have consumed tons and tons of academic and pop cultural content that have shaped my growing understanding of Black history and experiences. So I ask you to think and do the same about Asian and Asian American history. I'll keep it short, but all this to say, the labor should not fall on the ones that are most affected. And if it does, if you call in your Asian and Asian American colleagues, friends, and neighbors to teach you, and especially in institutions, corporate spaces, schools, organizations, pay them. Pay them for their emotional and intellectual labor, because too often we're doing this work without being paid, and we're doing it for other people and not for our own healing. So with that, my headline is, healing is an action.
Thank you so much, Amy. I was privileged to be part of that healing space that we had over the weekend, and it was much needed for me personally. I mentioned to the group that I have slept probably a total of 3 or 4 hours over the weekend, including this week. And to Amy's point, one of my friends randomly sent me $5 and told me to buy coffee. So I would just encourage allies and friends, ask your Asian American friends if they've eaten lunch. I have forgotten to eat meals during the day because I've been so busy consuming the news and helping and writing. So just send them a meal, ask them if they're doing okay. And on that note, I would like to invite Adele from Los Angeles TRHT to share some of her feelings.
Thank you, Stephanie. Wow, I need a deep breath too. My name is Adele Lee, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining you from TRHT Los Angeles. and the traditional land of Tongva, Gabrieleno, Chumash, and Keys Nation. I'm the daughter of Korean immigrants, and I was born and raised in LA. I struggled to find what I wanted to share today because at any given moment, I'm still processing feelings of anger, grief, fear, sadness. As the names and ages and information about those murdered were being released, I got especially choked up because one of the Korean women shared the same name as my aunt, who too has a son about the same age as hers and came to America to find a better opportunity for her family. So it's been really difficult to sleep or eat thinking about those who were murdered and their families and friends, and also feeling fearful for my life and my loved ones. It's also brought up a lot of suppressed feelings about my own experiences as an Asian woman, of all the times I've been exoticized and fetishized as an object, not a person, as a character to some fantasy. I've been asked by complete strangers what kind of sexual favors I can do for them, which anime character they think I resemble. Before I can even put together a sentence, they're quick to respond that it's just a joke or that I should be flattered. I think about the countless times separate and together with racial fetishizations that I've been the target of racial slurs, the mimicking of my language, my eyes, and the way I laugh. I think about all the times I just had to take it, to bear it, because as a child, I didn't have the language. And as an adult, I was afraid if I spoke up, it could turn violent. And then having to replay those moments and live with the shame that I didn't do more. So to say this is not a race thing, it's not a gender thing, is complete bullshit and minimizes and erases my experience as an Asian woman, our identities and our history, and also that of other women of color. Part of the experience of being Asian in America feels like screaming into a dark void. Amy shared with me that she wrote about this too, and so I imagine we're not alone in this feeling. It feels like when you scream, people see you scream, but none of it is heard, or you're told, why are you screaming? You have it so good in America. And then you begin to doubt yourself and think, yeah, why am I screaming? No one seems to care. Or maybe I'm making a big fuss, and maybe I should just be grateful for what I have. And so we too add to this invisibility. And I know that we do it in our own community too. We don't share our racial traumas with each other, with our elders, and with our kids, perhaps because of our own internalized racism or some lingering effects of the model minority myth to not make noise, not to call attention, to say our pain is not as horrific as other people of color. But we know that is exactly how white supremacy operates, to make us feel small, to fight against each other, to feel alone and insignificant. And so we need to fight together against white supremacy. Let's make that noise. Let's grieve. Let's start a process of healing with ourselves, with each other, and with our communities, because our fight is intertwined. Today, I don't feel so small. I feel seen, especially here with my chosen family, showing up for us and for our community. So I just want to say thank you to the whole TRHT fam. I love you, and I care for you, and I feel seen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adele. Everything you were saying reminded me so much of a quote that the actor Steven Yeun was quoted saying in a magazine interview that was, sometimes I wonder if the Asian American experience is what it's like when you're thinking about everyone else, but nobody is thinking about you. So I appreciate you uplifting that. And I am going to bring my other fellow Dallas sister, Aileen Fullchange, on to speak.
Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Aileen Fullchange, and I want to start with my name, my first name, Aileen. The first part of my first name is I, and in Taiwanese, which is the language of my mother, my father, my first language, the language of my ancestors, I means love. Now, you can't love someone without seeing them, hearing them, and To be Asian in this country is to not be seen or heard. Even when we yell, we cry, we scream. I think of my identity as an Asian woman and the words that have been hurled at me. I have been told when I speak up that I am too aggressive, that my communication has an edge to it. Who do you think you are? You're trying to be an alpha female. And when I'm quiet and I'm submissive, I'm told that I'm highly professional. And, you know, of course, I have to talk about the objectification that's happened all of my life, beginning at the age of 12. I can remember going with my parents to City Hall, applying to be citizens, to be US citizens. And as I was going through the security protocol in the building, going through the metal detector, having my bag searched, one of the security guards, who was a 40, 50-year-old white man, started catcalling me. My parents were out of range of hearing. I don't know that they would have even known what was going on. That started for me over 25 years ago, and it's been ongoing since then. And then there's the othering, like many of my Asian sisters have spoken about, the mocking of my eyes. I remember one time at a dinner table, a white man who was a friend of a friend of mine, just abruptly, you know, put his hands over around his eyes and pushed them back and literally started saying ching chong, and then asked if I understood. I was at a hair salon once, waiting in line, and the woman maybe 2 seats down from me said to the woman next to her, "I wonder if she even speaks English." And I said some curse words and then yes. I remember more recently at work, colleagues just coming up to me and running their hands through my hair. I've been called chinky. The list goes on and on and on. And, you know, as many of my colleagues have alluded to, there's a long history of these experiences that have led to the culmination of these recent events, these anti-Asian hate events. And actually, I want to correct that. White supremacist anti-Asian hate. And this history is, as Amy mentioned, isn't in our history books, in our history curriculum in schools. I certainly didn't learn about the history of Asians in America until I was an adult and out of school. And in fact, I used to hate history class. And I didn't realize why until I was an adult, because the history wasn't about me or for me. And there continues to be this silencing of Asians in America by the omission of our history and our truths and our narratives, including the denial of our history of activism and uprising, the denial of our history of oppression, which has led to this model minority stereotype, a completely false myth. It is a collective gaslighting, gaslighting of me, of each one of you, whether or not you are proximate or distant from the violence. And that gaslighting is a weapon. The model minority myth is a weapon that's been used against Asians, to pit Asians against other races. And now, you know, more recently, there's been weaponizing of a horrible global pandemic against Asians. Obviously, it takes a toll. I'm a licensed psychologist by profession. So there's a lot that I've seen in terms of the toll of this white supremacist anti-Asian hate. Even before the pandemic, amongst Asian people or in the Asian population, we see, especially in some of the subgroups, some of the lowest high school graduation rates, some of the highest, widest income disparities, some of the most trauma exposure, and also very much an underutilization of mental health services, and also an under-offering of mental health services. Here in Dallas, I'm originally from California, from the Bay Area, and I've lived in New York as well, and been across the country. And Dallas is one of the few, if not perhaps the only major metropolitan area that does not have any mental health center that's dedicated to the Asian population. And yet Texas we rank in the top 10 states for places that have the fastest growing Asian populations. There's a collective ignoring of our distress, of our suffering, and it touches each and every one of us. I'll give you an example. So when I was in kindergarten, I was really, really shy. I didn't say a word. I would have qualified for a diagnosis called selective mutism. And instead, what happened, instead of me getting mental health services to treat an anxiety disorder, what I got was my parents being told, well, we don't think she speaks English, so we're going to put her in the ESL class. And by the way, what are you speaking at home? Oh, Taiwanese. You should stop that and speak English. These false myths, especially this false myth around the model minority, harms all of us. It harms Asian people because we don't feel like we have a right to voice when we are suffering. We don't feel like we have a right to ask for help. And we think that we are alone and isolated. It affects people of color who are not Asian because this false myth of us being compliant, models, even adjacent to white, means that people of color lose allies and solidarity in the Asian community. And it affects white people because white people see us as foreigners to fear. They don't get to know us, our rich resilience, our wisdom, our uniqueness, our diversity. One of the things that is part of the collective gaslighting is even seeing us as a monolith, as all the same. When we actually look at who is Asian, in Asia, there are hundreds of languages, hundreds of cultural identities. And so to lump us all into one category is another form of collective gaslighting. When I think it's easy to say, hey, we are suffering from this oppression, and end of the story. And I want to acknowledge that in a system where certain humans are valued over others, the suffering is really everywhere, in the agents of oppression and the targets of oppression. It's easy for me as a target of oppression racially to talk about the suffering of in my own story and in my community. But the truth is that the targets of oppression also suffer because there is fear. There's fear in terms of myself, my fellow Asian community members and Asian sisters living in fear of perhaps us being the next target of violence. But then there's also fear that's experienced by the agents of oppression as they fear us. And we know what fear does to the body. we know that fear activates a little tiny piece of the brain called the amygdala. And it deactivates all these other parts of the brain, like the cerebral cortex that's responsible for higher order thinking, creativity, functioning. So it is really out of love and care that I am committed to dismantling white supremacy and stopping anti-Asian hate. And I really resonate with the call for those who are more distant from the direct suffering to really take up the mantle right now, to acknowledge the truth, to stop the gaslighting, to acknowledge the truth of our individual and collective narratives. Because if there isn't that acknowledging of truth, then we will just keep perpetuating the oldest racist tactic in the book against Asian Americans, which is to silence our stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fullchange. I want to pass it off to our friend from TRHT Kalamazoo, Miss Jen Heymoss. So I'm going to add you to the stage.
Thank you. I'm Jen Heymoss, and I'm on the leadership team at TRHT Kalamazoo. Just thank you so much for the honor of sharing my feelings and experiences tonight. All of my life, I've balanced on that line of being white and Filipino. Being ambiguously ethnic has often meant that I'm confused with other BIPOC. So I've experienced microaggressions and violence aimed towards different groups as well as my own. It has made bonding, or in this case, grieving with my community, difficult because my experience with internalized racism and oppression make me question if I have a place to grieve or if I'm grieving right. I've compartmentalized the history of my family in my everyday life, but since last Wednesday morning, I haven't been able to stop dwelling on the expectations, conditions, and historical context that force Asian women to bear the trauma of sexualized racism. And this trauma is generational. We need to be specific in naming that for many Asian women, it's wrapped in the fetishization and objectification of Asian women's bodies. In a box up in my closet, I have a letter that predates my existence. It's to my white father from a white man in the military that describes different types of Asian women, the best kinds, and the best ways to obtain one for yourself. In this case, it was suggested he go through a catalog. In the 1980s, this was referred to as mail order brides, and today we would call it what it is, which is international trafficking. This is directly connected to US imperialism. US imperialism is what set up a system where white men in the United States could order a woman to marry and bear their children. And this is white violence that is rooted in white supremacy. It's internalized in the families, including mine, that grow out of this violence. The story of resilient warriors, like my mother, are innumerable and invisible. And just as invisible are the over 9,000 workplaces, like the massage parlors that were attacked last week. These workplaces have no political representation. They have no access to labor rights. These women could be any of our mothers, sisters, aunties, elders, and friends. So I want to end my comments by honoring the resilience of Asian women like my mother. These warriors and badasses, even though in my family it was a cultural expectation to not talk about how badass you are, or even to say the word badass. But I do want to say that just because we are resilient badasses, it doesn't mean we are not so tired. We're exhausted. And we'll continue to be there for each other, to talk openly about our histories and trauma, even though it's not normal to do so, and to make room to heal these generational traumas. And I encourage our allies to step in, to keep checking in, and to provide spaces for healing, and to support your people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. I have another friend from Kalamazoo, and let me just make sure that I can spotlight Xiaoan Li. There you are. Okay, I'm going to add you to the spotlight. There you are.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Jennifer and Aileen, who spoke before Jan. I resonate with both of you for this moment because you made it very personal. I was born and raised in Southern China, came to the United States when I was in my 20s to pursue my American dream. I was quite serious about it. I just give you a quick example about before I even actually had my US driver's license. I drove all the way to Philadelphia just to pay a visit to the Statue of Liberty, just to want to see something I only read about. I even drove all the way to Selma and I marched there, acting like I was kind of like Dr. King and many fellows. They peacefully marched. I'm been a good 20 years in the United States. I formed my family, actually even having 2 children. Tonight, I want to bring all the youth voice into the mix because that's how I feel that a lot of times we as adults probably underestimate the impact as a result of what's covered on the media, as a result of this widespread anti-Asian sentiment and the impact that it's having on the children. You made it very clear, Aileen, in this case, about the early childhood adverse experience and its positive correlation when they actually become adult, that the likelihood they have to deal with severe substance abuse, depression, and even societal issues. Let's pay attention to all the children of the Asian American family tonight. I want to make it personal. I'm a father of 2. My son David is a wonderful child. When he's attending a school in Midwest, Southwest Michigan, where he found himself to be one of the very few Asian American kids in the entire school. The first year he transferred this school, wintertime in Michigan, a lot of snow, and much bigger kids sitting on his face, telling him, "You don't belong here." That was many years ago. He's 13 years now today. During COVID period of time, he has received a lot of remarks such as, "Shame on you, David. You Chinese brought us all this." This remark was from the friends he plays video games all day long. Okay, let's just pay attention, ladies and gentlemen. If you were my David, get to receive that comment from you believe to be good friends. My daughter, who's 8, beautiful child. So not too long ago, when the Proud Boy, decided to pay a visit to Kalamazoo, the city even had to have curfew for a couple of nights. My home, beautiful home, conveniently located by Highway I-94. We got a message from the church. They say, "Watch out. There's some risk of it being dangerous tonight." I noticed the difference, the fear, the trembling in my young daughter. For the first time, she actually dragged my hand to say, "Daddy, should we lower our window curtain so nobody else can see if they drive by that we are a Chinese family living in this neighborhood?" I did not feel safe at all. That's why I want to make this personal. It has been very personal to me. Well, there's so many other families over here, okay? We're talking about millions of children self-identify as Asian American youth and children. What are we gonna do? Okay, let's forget about the personal level. Let's bring to the large audience of the children and youth who self-identify as this important identity. I'm here to propose 3 things. First of all, We have to recognize this country will never get to a place where all of our youth can survive and thrive without intentionally transforming the inequitable system and removing the structural barrier designed to keep all Asian American and Pacific Islander, as well as Black, as well as Indigenous, and any other youth of color, separate from any opportunity and facing the consequences of racist policies and practices. We have to recognize that as a country. Second of all, knowing the beautiful, the resilience within David and Claire, I know we have to do everything we can to lift up the youth voice, the struggles, the joys, and the leadership and engagement. One of my favorite authors in this case, Beverly Tatum, really proposed a wonderful, easy to understand approach, the ABC approach. A, affirming identity. Nothing to be ashamed to be American, to be Asian American. B, building the community. We are building a community right here. Can we build a community in the neighborhood? Can we build in a community in the school? C, to cultivate a leadership. How can we create an opportunity, really to create opportunity for them to become a leader, knowing that they can actually make a difference right there where they are. Making space for youth to speak, to engage, and to lead is such an essential step. We are a bunch of adults expressing our feeling, our anxiety and the disappointment. Make sure we create such opportunity for the youth too. I will end my little remark tonight by advocating quite important for us to focus on the narratives about intersectionality and injustice. Well, media is covering everything right now this week. I'm glad they're doing it. Well, they're gonna probably move on rather quickly. Next week and next month, what are we gonna do? As a group talking about sustainability of this topic, because it's so deep, it is so embedded in the history, in the structure and the system. So I'm here to support and to really propose, it is so crucial to draw the connections between white supremacy and the responsibility of the leaders and the media. Media, folks, to name these historical and the social factors and the role of systemic racism, it's actually having a deep impact, most of the times a negative way, on the real lives. I'm speaking to you as a father of two. Thank you for this opportunity, and thanks for your listening. Stephanie, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, especially for uplifting, needing to center our young people. I'm just thinking about how terrified that I have been lately, and I can't even imagine what younger children are experiencing in that fear and bullying. So I'm going to pass it to my other Dallas colleague, Ms. Huang Jin-Ya, so that I can turn my video off for a little bit.
Hi, thank you, Stephanie, and everyone at TRHT. Thank you so much for holding space for me. My name is Huang Jin-Ya, or Jin-Ya, Jin-Ya Huang. I am the founder of Break Bread, Break Borders. Our story actually began when I actually grew up in Taipei, Taiwan, and came to the States when I was 13. My parents actually wanted to bring us to, my sisters and I, the girls, to America so we can have access to better education. And we came because my aunt and uncle actually started a restaurant business. And so we came to help out with the family. And so from Taipei, Taiwan to Tulsa, Oklahoma, it was definitely a culture shock. We actually ended up, saving up enough to actually purchase one of the franchises here in Dallas. And my mom, Mei-Ying Huang, Margaret Huang, actually was the chef and very much a community leader. And so growing up, I grew up watching my mom, who would teach immigrants, refugees, and migrants to come and work in our kitchen and train them with job skills and send them on to bigger and better opportunities. And so as a descendant of refugees, who escaped China to take refuge and to find freedom in Taiwan, I'm very much related to this this notion, and I just was utterly amazed, how much my mom was transforming lives each and every day, and I wanted to, really speak up about this. And so when I came to the States, I actually didn't speak any English. And so art became my universal language, as food became my mom's universal language. And so when I lost my mom to cancer, I founded Break Bread, Break Borders to honor her legacy. And so, the days that that I was the language broker, for my parents, we often experienced, people who were dissatisfied with the service or the food or whatnot, and would just basically tell us to go back to wherever the heck we came from. And whenever I was actually at the restaurant, we would pass those health department inspections because I spoke English just a little better, and those things just continued to build up, right? And so as a social practice artist, I wanted to make art that really addressed this, and so Break Bread, Break Borders actually started out as an art project, and it was supposed to be a community dinner that basically brought people together to a safe space and to have courageous conversations. And the refugee community cooks with BBBB didn't just, cook and share food and culture. They actually share their storytelling. So they talk about what it was like to escape war-torn countries from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Nepal, the Congo, and we hear them share what it's like to live as refugees abroad, and they talk about what it's like coming to America and what it's like to cook with Break Bread, Break Borders. And so this unique culinary experience, really built a very interesting interaction and engagement with the communities. And, as an artist, when my community asks for fire, I don't bring it water. And so, when the lady said, we don't really need another beautiful dinner, we really need jobs. And that's why we kind of went and founded this LLC. And as a business, it does all these social justice work. And the food is the vehicle to really become that equalizer that we desperately needed in this space. And it really helped to open conversations that, when diners, ask our cooks, why are you here in America, out of all places to come to in the world? Why are you stealing good Americans' jobs? Once they consume the food and hear the story, putting that face with the food, it was incredibly difficult to hate someone up close. And we had people who were afraid to try international cuisine, from Syria, and one bite into the rice, took them all the way back to those really strong food memories, from their grandmother kitchen in New Orleans and in Louisiana, the dirty rice that his grandmother used to cook. And so it's we wanted to connect the dots in that way, from an artistic, creative solution perspective. And, looking at the statistics, so many of the anti-Asian hate crimes were happening, 35% of it are happening to businesses. And, you know, we know our business owners are hurting, our entrepreneurs are hurting, and, you know, immigrants contribute to so much of this, you know, this in America. And we really truly believe that racial justice is tied with economic justice. And, you know, and to level set that, you know, we wanted to kind of bring this, you know, to the forefront. And, you know, on top of using the arts to educate our communities, I'm also actually a member at the Orchid Giving Circle, a local organization that is nonprofit, and we actually are an Asian sisterhood that basically gather and use our fundraising and, you know, superpowers to gather philanthropy for the Asian Americans here in the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth area communities. And you know, growing up, watching my mom and dad, you know, volunteer at the Buddhist Compassion Relief Foundation, you know, we grew up, you know, not only, you know, following mom to cook, you know, for the homeless, or, you know, visiting the nursing homes and, you know, sewing blankets, you know, for shelters. You know, we really, you know, really equated those opportunities, you know, to basically what we're doing at Orchid Giving Circle now. And, you know, I don't know if you guys know this, but literally less than 1% of philanthropic dollars here in America actually go to Asian American organizations. It's less than 1%, and that has got to change. And so, you know, I echo many of our sisters and brothers in the AAPI community here, speaking here tonight, that we really do have to teach our young, and it's never too early to start. And, you know, and I really want us to use the arts to embrace love and hope for the future. And I hope that we can get to a better space, and because we're stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jin-Ya, my friend, who is also my colleague, and so many other things that we do in the Dallas community. This event started off with a conversation, really a text conversation between Adele, Jaye, Lana, and I, because we've developed a TRHT family. So often we check on each other, see how each other is doing. And with the combination of Stephanie, we knew we needed to hear from our Asian brothers and sisters across the country. TRHT, in its beauty, has developed this national family for us, and ability for us to also share what we need to do in our communities. And so at this point, I want our TRHT community to share our support of our Asian brothers and sisters and non-binary folks. And I want to give us 1 minute to do that, because we want to make sure that we have time for our sister Adele to also share some resources after we finish, with the exception of course, our elders. We're going to start with, you know, náay, Liz Medicine Crow, and we're going to end with Dr. Christopher, who is Chief Architect of TRHT, and we're so glad to have her on the call with us. But we want to just keep it to 1 minute, share who you are, where you're from, and anything you want to share, and we will keep going. Thank you all. My sister Laguna.
Xiaoan so much for creating this space, to Dallas TRHT and all of the folks who came together to plan it out, and for inviting us in. I just really wanted to say to our Asian family that I love you. And my heart's broken. Again and again, our hearts break. And the only mending for that is us. And a system that no longer makes this a normal thing. And your voices are so important. for letting me bear witness to your stories. And I'll continue to look for ways that we can uplift you and your voices and your leadership. And reach out to me if there's anything else that I can help with. But I just really wanted to acknowledge the power and beauty of your truths, as painful as they are. And thank you for your trust in letting us hear them.
Thank you, Liz. My sister, Wáahlaal, Gíidaak, Barbara Blake from Alaska.
I also want to say how I've been as Xiaoan. Thank you so much for coordinating this and for allowing us to bear witness to your stories. In our culture, it is vastly important that we stand tall and we stand in the way of doing the hard work when our family is grieving. And that is our role, to ensure that you don't have to do the hard work, that your family is here behind you and standing with you to do that hard work and to help you and to hold you up when you're exhausted and to help push your story and lift your voices higher than they've ever been and to ensure that they don't fall to the ground. That after the media stops with this, that your stories continue on, and know that we will be there and we're there to make sure that these stories don't fall to the ground, that your voices are heard beyond this time.
Thank you, Barbara. My sister Lana from Kalamazoo.
Hi, everyone. Sholana from Kalamazoo. I just want to thank everybody who have spoken and shared, as others have said. These past 4 years doing this TRHT thing, TRHT work, I can't think of doing it without you all. You all have given it so much life and meaning. Both my folks from all over the country and also folks that are right here in Kalamazoo. And I'm honored to work with you all every day, and honored for the family, whether that's been, in our national gatherings or creating healing spaces right here for Kalamazoo. We have been in this work together. Even though our oppression and our oppressor would like to keep us apart, we know that we have seen ourselves in each other. We've seen our struggle in each other's struggle. And we know that healing means, the response to hate is always us. Like it was said, our struggle against state violence for Black folks, you all have been there. It breaks my heart to think about how much moments like this can divide us. And I just want to stand here with you and say thank you. Thank you for being there for me. And I'm here for you all because we know our liberation is tied together. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Lana. My sister Rosemary from Battle Creek.
Thank you, Jerry. My name is Rosemary Linares with the Battle Creek Coalition for TRHT. And again, thank you all so much for sharing your truth and honesty and vulnerability and rawness in the moment to make this space happen. To prepare for today, I was thinking about what is a quote that can help to ground me in this moment. And I thought of civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer, who says, nobody's free until everybody's free. And the theme of the intertwinedness, as Adele said, our fight for liberation and racial justice is bound together. And also nobody's safe until everybody's safe. Last week, my son, who's 6, saw a sign and it said, make love, not war, and his face looked confused. And so I said, do you know what war means? And he said, no. So I said, I'll teach you later, because I want him to stay an innocent child for as long as he can be. But he already knows what war is. He just doesn't know what it's called. And I think about the violence that brought us to here today and that's happened and that we've referenced so many times. And our children at such young ages know what war is. They know how to respond. They're given instructions
to respond in the face of race-based violence. And that's a component, that's a pattern of this domestic terror and white supremacy in this country. And so again, another quote that was helpful to me to find some grounding, it was in Grace Lee Boggs, who's a daughter of Chinese immigrants, an incredible revolutionary who lived to be 100, many of those years in Detroit. And she said, the only way to survive is by taking care of one another. And that's what we have to do, and that's what we're doing. And we do this through TRHT locally, and we're doing this through TRHT nationally. And so nobody's safe until everybody's safe, and we keep us safe in community that's deeply rooted in love across race and solidarity. And I love my Asian brothers and sisters, and I see you. I see you, and thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. My brother, DK from Selma.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see family here all again, and also new folks that I haven't met yet and are in on this call. Coming to you from a Korean and Caucasian household. These issues affect my household and our marriage very personally here in my home. I'm not in Selma at the moment, I'm in Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery is the seat of Hyundai manufacturing in the United States. Alabama, we acknowledge our Asian brothers and sisters' contributions on the coast, whether they be from Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, so-called boat people that came as refugees and now are the leaders in our shrimping and seafood industry and boat building industry, which is a huge part of Alabama's economic output. And so what we must stand for in solidarity here and is that what is good for America, what is good for Asian Americans, what is good for Asians and Caucasians, whatever race in the United States, we're all in this together. There's no separation. And so this violence and foolishness is utter stupidity. And we're next door neighbors to our brothers and sisters in Atlanta. And so we see those things going on there and elsewhere. And we're very fearful of these things and praying that we don't see this spilling out more into our area as well. So we stand in solidarity, we grieve with you, and it's something that is very close to home, more than many might think for the state of Alabama, for sure.
Thank you, Brother DK. Although they didn't sign up to speak, I want to acknowledge my sister Lynn from Flint, my sister Ladora from Richmond, Sister Felicia from TRHT Buffalo, and so many other folks who are on this call. Thank you all for being here and supporting. I just can't wait to see you all again. We'll close out our TRHT community section with our beloved Dr. Gail Christopher. And Dr. Gail, I think you are muted. We'll see if our co-host can unmute you. Hold on for a minute.
Is that better?
There it is. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you for allowing me to be present and to be honored by your spirits and your palpable love and grace that you are extending to one another. It is a dream come true for me to experience the family that you have created and the courage that you have to support one another. The intention is to develop the capacity to see ourselves in the face of what was the perceived other. And you are demonstrating that, and you are embracing each other with pure love and with the courage to identify that that which must be removed is this false ideology, this false delusional belief in a hierarchy of human value, and to replace it with the simple truth of our interdependence and interconnectedness and our need for one another. A democracy will not thrive without that revolution, without that transformation in our society. So I'm just so sorry that this violence has been inflicted upon the Asian American community. I am so thankful that this will be available by video. This beautiful evening will be there so that others can experience and feel the depth of the hurt and the depth of the humanity and the resilience that you embody as a community. So thank you. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And I continue to work to try and expand and elevate the work so that it really does become the foundation of our permission to jettison the fallacy of a hierarchy of human value and to replace it with the only thing that can replace it, which is our love for one another. So Jerry and all of you there in Dallas, thank you for organizing this. This was really a joy for me to be a participant and to observe the growth and the power of the work and of your voices. So truly thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Dr. Gail Christopher, and really thank you to Stephanie and our Asian brothers and sisters for being very courageous to share. So I will turn it over to my sister Adele to share some resources with us, and Stephanie will close us out after Adele. Thank you all, and I love you.
Thank you all so much. I'm definitely feeling overwhelmed with so much love and care from each of you. I did want to spend the next couple of minutes uplifting some actions I heard in our conversations and some resources and notes. We did compile a list at dallastrht.org/stop Asian hate. Again, as Amy uplifted, this is just the beginning, and please remember to do your own learning and not depend on others to educate you. There is absolutely nothing you cannot find on the internet. So with that note, I'll also share, please learn about our long history in America, as well as the American imperialism in Asia. Learn about our cross-racial solidarity work, past and present, and have a critical race and gender lens on the media you consume, and be mindful of what you consume and how much. And for those of Asian descent, let's remember Amy's message again, that healing is an action and to take care of ourselves. Some other actionable items, including donating to the victims' families, supporting AAPI businesses, nonprofits, organizations. Again, if your organization is bringing in BIPOC to speak about their lived experiences or to educate your staff, pay them. Racial equity work is not free and should be a line item. If your organization is able to put out a statement, then they should be willing to put money where their mouth is. We are not a monolith. We are not monolithic, so our experiences, our stories, our culture, our language are unique. Therefore, ask, request, demand for disaggregated data. This is super important because this directly impacts what type and how much resource each community gets. And of course, this goes without saying, but check in with your friends and family, and especially with the kids and youth in your life. I once shared with my friend that I was afraid to walk, and she said, I'll walk with you. And that made me feel super seen and cared for. Show us that you see us, not just through statements, but through your actions, big or small. We all have influence, and that could just start with something small, like using the right language, because words matter. For example, it's not anti-Asian sentiment. It is anti-Asian hate and violence. And it could be also something so simple as believing our stories like we did today. And lastly, our racial traumas are different, but the source of our racial trauma is white supremacy. Understanding how systemic racism is insidious in all of our lives, and to know that these are not isolated freak events, but a well-oiled machinery with one agenda that has been operating for centuries. I know some of you have requested how to get in contact with us, so we will also be sharing that on the resource webpage with all of our contact information and the cities that we represent. And then I think we'll be uploading that as more resources come together from this group as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adele. And thank you for putting so many of those resources together. You did a lot of, that was a very labor intensive process. as we close out for the evening, I'd like to first thank all of our speakers for opening their hearts and sharing such meaningful and, as you heard, painful testimonies. We are also so grateful to our TRHT leaders who spoke in solidarity and continue to work alongside us to transform our communities into radically inclusive ones. And thank you to each person who is watching this now or in the future for taking time from your lives to affirm the value of ours. We hope that the space provided what you need at this moment and that you will continue to join us moving forward as we still have a very long road ahead of us. And before we end the broadcast, I would also like to share a quote, as Rosemary did, from revolutionary activist Grace Lee Boggs, who said, "I've come to believe that you cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it." So thank you all for joining us and have a good night.
Thank you all.